The rain fell steadily, weaving rivers through cracked pavement as Lila Harper trudged home after another exhausting shift. At 23, she had aged far beyond her years. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and worry lines creased her forehead. Her hands, calloused from scrubbing floors and lifting heavy boxes, clutched a worn umbrella that barely kept her dry. But none of it mattered compared to the weight pressing on her chest. How would she feed Ethan tonight? Ethan was only 12, but his fragile frame made him look younger. Chronic illness had robbed him of energy, appetite, and so much more. Without proper treatment, his condition worsened daily. A cruel reminder of their inability to afford even basic health care. Lila worked tirelessly to keep them afloat, but no matter how many hours she put in, there never seemed to be enough money for rent, medicine, or food. Tonight, though, desperation clawed at her throat. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, saving the meager scraps from yesterday's dinner for Ethan. As she passed an upscale restaurant glowing warmly against the dreary night, the smell of roasted garlic and fresh bread wafted out, making her stomach twist painfully. That's when she saw him. Daniel Whitmore sat alone at a table near the window, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. His presence exuded wealth and power, the kind of man who probably didn't think twice about ordering dishes costing more than Lila earned in a week. For a moment, she hesitated, shame burning in her cheeks. What was she doing? Begging for food wasn't something she'd ever imagined herself doing. Yet here she was, standing outside a gilded door, clinging to the last shred of dignity she possessed. Taking a deep breath, Lila approached the valet stand where Daniel stood waiting for his car. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice trembling. When he turned, his sharp blue eyes studied her intently, taking in her soaked clothes and weary expression. "Yes?" he asked, his tone guarded yet polite. I'm sorry to bother you," Lila stammered, clutching the strap of her bag tightly. "But I was wondering, could I have your leftovers? Please." For a split second, Daniel looked taken aback. Then, without hesitation, he nodded. "Of course." Turning to the hostess inside, he requested the doggy bag from his meal and handed it to Lila moments later. "Here you go." Lila blinked back tears, overwhelmed by his kindness. "Thank you so much. You don't know what this means to me." As she hurried away, clutching the package like it held the secrets to survival, Daniel watched her disappear into the rainy night. Something about her haunted him, an unspoken depth behind her quiet plea. Who was she, and why did she need his leftovers so badly? Daniel stood under the awning of the restaurant, watching as Lila disappeared into the rainy night. The image of her, soaked, exhausted, yet determined, lingered in his mind like an unanswered question. Who was this woman? Why did she need his leftovers so desperately? And what kind of life had driven her to beg a stranger for scraps? Curiosity gnawed at him, sharper than he cared to admit. He told himself it was just idle interest, a fleeting moment of concern that would fade once he returned to his penthouse. But as he climbed into his luxury car, he found himself gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. Before he could second-guess his decision, he signaled the driver to follow her. The rain-soaked streets led them away from the glittering city center and into a part of town Daniel rarely visited. Here, the buildings were weathered and crumbling, their windows boarded up or shattered. Streetlights flickered weakly, casting long shadows over puddles littered with debris. It was a world apart from the polished skyscrapers and Michelin-starred restaurants he frequented, a reminder of the disparities he often chose to ignore. Lila walked briskly, hugging the doggy bag close to her chest as if it were precious cargo. She stopped outside a dilapidated apartment building, its facade streaked with grime and graffiti. After glancing around cautiously, she slipped inside. Daniel hesitated before stepping out of the car. His driver raised an eyebrow but said nothing, accustomed to Daniel's eccentricities. "Wait here," Daniel instructed quietly, pulling up the collar of his coat against the chill. He approached the building, peering through a cracked window on the ground floor. What he saw froze him in place. Inside the dimly lit apartment, Lila moved with quiet efficiency. She placed the leftover food on a small table, dividing it carefully onto 2 plates. One portion was significantly larger than the other. She carried the larger plate to a worn-out couch where a young boy lay wrapped in threadbare blankets. Even from a distance, Daniel could see how frail the child looked. His pale face sunken, his limbs thin beneath oversized pajamas. "Eat slowly, okay?" Lila murmured, brushing the boy's hair back gently. "It's good stuff." The boy managed a faint smile, though his movements were sluggish. Lila sat beside him, encouraging him to take each bite while she nibbled sparingly on the smaller portion. Eventually, she set her plate aside, leaving most of her share untouched. Instead, she tucked it into the nearly empty refrigerator, likely saving it for later. Daniel's throat tightened as he watched. Despite their dire circumstances, there was a tenderness in the way Lila cared for the boy, a selflessness that spoke volumes about her character. She sacrificed everything for him without complaint, putting his needs above her own survival. And then it hit him, the full weight of what he was witnessing. This wasn't just poverty. It was sacrifice on a level he couldn't comprehend. Growing up, Daniel had known hardship too. His family had struggled to make ends meet before his tech startup skyrocketed him to wealth. But somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten what it felt like to go without, to choose hunger over comfort, to fight tooth and nail for someone you loved. Standing there in the shadows, Daniel felt a pang of guilt so sharp it took his breath away. How many times had he walked past people like Lila without a second thought? How often had he dismissed their struggles as someone else's problem? Yet here she was, embodying resilience and love in its purest form, while he lived in a bubble of privilege and detachment. He stayed a few moments longer, committing the scene to memory before slipping back into the night. As he settled into the plush leather seat of his car, he stared out the rain-streaked window, lost in thought. For the first time in years, he questioned the purpose of his wealth. What good was money if it didn't help those who needed it most? That night, Daniel barely slept. Images of Lila and the boy haunted him, stirring memories he'd buried long ago. He thought about his own childhood, the cramped apartment, the hand-me-down clothes, the constant worry over bills. Back then, he'd vowed to never let anyone in his family suffer like that again. But somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of the bigger picture. Success had become an end in itself, rather than a means to create change. By morning, Daniel had made up his mind. He wouldn't walk away from this. Whatever it took, he would find a way to help Lila and her brother. Not because he owed them anything, but because they deserved a chance at a better life. And perhaps, in doing so, he might rediscover a piece of himself he'd thought was gone forever. The next morning, Daniel sat in his home office, staring at a blank document on his laptop. For the first time in years, he felt unsure where to begin. Helping people wasn't new to him. He'd donated millions to charities over the years, but this was different. This wasn't about writing a check and moving on. It was personal. Lila and Ethan weren't faceless recipients of his generosity. They were real people whose struggles had left an indelible mark on him. After some deliberation, Daniel decided to act discreetly. He reached out to contacts at one of the top hospitals in the city, arranging for Ethan to receive comprehensive medical care under a pseudonym. The hospital agreed to waive all costs, citing an anonymous benefactor as the source of funding. Meanwhile, Daniel ensured that medications, physical therapy, and nutritional supplements would be delivered directly to their apartment. A week later, Lila received a letter informing her that Ethan had been accepted into a specialized program offering free treatment for children with chronic illnesses. At first, she thought it was a mistake, or worse, a scam. But when representatives from the hospital arrived at her door, explaining the details and assuring her everything was legitimate, disbelief gave way to overwhelming relief. Tears streamed down Lila's face as she hugged Ethan tightly. "We're going to get you better," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. For the first time in months, hope flickered in her chest like a fragile flame. As Ethan began receiving treatment, Daniel found himself unable to stay away. He visited the hospital occasionally, posing as a concerned philanthropist interested in supporting pediatric programs. During these visits, he struck up conversations with Lila, learning more about her dreams and aspirations. I used to want to be a nurse, Lila admitted one afternoon while waiting for Ethan's appointment. She hesitated, as if embarrassed by the admission. But life got in the way. Daniel tilted his head, intrigued. Why didn't you pursue it? Lila shrugged, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. You need money for school and I couldn't afford it. Besides, Ethan needed me. That had to come first. Her words struck a chord with Daniel. Here was someone who had sacrificed everything. Not just material comforts but also her own ambitions, for the sake of someone she loved. It was a level of devotion he admired deeply but struggled to fully understand. Over time, Daniel began visiting their apartment as well, bringing groceries and other essentials. At first, Lila was wary of his presence, fearing ulterior motives. Why are you doing this? She asked during one visit, her tone guarded. What do you want from us? Nothing, Daniel replied sincerely. I just want to help. Seeing what you've done for your brother, it reminds me of things I've forgotten. Important things. His honesty disarmed her, and slowly, she began to let her guard down. Their conversations grew longer, delving into topics beyond Ethan's recovery. Lila shared stories about growing up in a tight-knit family, her love for cooking despite limited resources, and her secret dream of returning to school someday. In turn, Daniel opened up about his own childhood, growing up poor before achieving success, and how he often felt disconnected from the world he now inhabited. Through these exchanges, a tentative bond formed between them. Lila started seeing Daniel not just as a wealthy benefactor but as someone genuinely invested in their well-being. And Daniel, for his own part, found himself drawn to her resilience and warmth. With consistent medical care, Ethan's condition began to improve dramatically. His strength returned, and color crept back into his cheeks. The once frail boy who could barely sit up now laughed and played, filling the small apartment with joy once again. Lila marveled at the change, crediting both the doctors and Daniel for giving her brother a second chance at life. One evening, as they sat together eating dinner, real food this time, not leftovers, Ethan looked up at Lila with a mischievous grin. Can we keep Mr. Whitmore forever? He's nice. Lila chuckled softly, glancing toward the corner of the room where Daniel stood awkwardly, holding a cup of tea. I think he has his own life to get back to, kiddo. But yes, he's been very kind. Daniel smiled faintly, though his heart clenched at the thought of walking away. Helping Lila and Ethan had reignited something within him, a sense of purpose he hadn't realized was missing. Yet he knew he couldn't intrude indefinitely. They needed stability, not dependency. Encouraged by Ethan's progress, Daniel approached Lila one evening with a proposal. What if I helped you go back to school? He suggested gently. You mentioned wanting to become a nurse. Let me support you while you pursue that dream. Lila stiffened, her eyes widening in surprise. I can't ask you to do that. You've already done so much. You're not asking, Daniel countered firmly. I'm offering. Think of it as repayment, for reminding me of what truly matters. For a moment, Lila said nothing, her gaze dropping to her hands. Then quietly she nodded. Okay, thank you. Over the following weeks, Daniel arranged for Lila to enroll in a nursing program, covering tuition and providing a modest stipend to ease her financial burden. With his help, she balanced coursework with occasional shifts at a local clinic, gaining hands-on experience alongside her studies. Watching Lila thrive, Daniel felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known in years. Her determination inspired him to reconnect with his own values, leading him to launch initiatives aimed at supporting others in similar situations. Together, they began transforming not only their individual lives but also the lives of countless others. With Daniel's support, Lila threw herself into her nursing program with fierce determination. Balancing classes, clinical rotations, and caring for Ethan wasn't easy, but she refused to let exhaustion or doubt derail her progress. Each late night spent studying and every challenging shift at the clinic brought her closer to her goal, and each small victory reignited her hope for a brighter future. At first, Lila struggled to adapt to the rigorous demands of the program. The coursework was intense, requiring hours of memorization and critical thinking. During clinical rotations, She often second-guessed herself, fearing she'd make a mistake that could harm a patient. But her professors quickly recognized her potential, praising her compassion and natural ability to connect with patients. One instructor even told her, "You have a gift, Lila. Don't ever lose sight of why you're here." Despite the encouragement, there were moments when self-doubt crept in. Late one evening, after failing a particularly difficult exam, Lila sat alone in their tiny apartment, tears streaming down her face. She wondered if she was foolish to think she could succeed after years of hardship. Would she ever truly escape the shadow of poverty? Daniel found her like that when he stopped by unexpectedly with groceries. Without saying a word, he set the bags down and pulled up a chair beside her. "Talk to me," he said gently. Lila hesitated before confessing her fears, that she wasn't smart enough, that she'd fail Ethan, that she'd disappoint everyone who believed in her. To her surprise, Daniel didn't offer platitudes or dismiss her concerns. Instead, he shared his own struggles, how he doubted himself countless times during the early days of building his company, how failure had almost broken him more than once. "You're stronger than you realize," he told her firmly. "And you're not doing this alone. We'll figure it out together." His words gave her strength, reminding her that resilience wasn't about never falling. It was about getting back up every time you did. Slowly but surely, Lila regained her footing, excelling in her studies and earning praise from both instructors and peers. As months turned into years, Lila began piecing together clues about Daniel's role in her life. The anonymous hospital funding, the tuition payments, the steady stream of support, it all pointed to him. When she finally confronted him one evening, her tone was a mix of gratitude and frustration. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "I thought it was some charity program, not you." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I wanted to help without making you feel obligated. I didn't want you to see me as anything other than someone who cared." "But that's just it," Lila exclaimed, pacing the room. "You've done so much for us, for me, and I can't repay you. How am I supposed to live with that?" Daniel stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Lila, you don't owe me anything. What I've done isn't charity, it's admiration. You've inspired me in ways I can't put into words. If anything, I should be thanking you." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Lila sank onto the couch, covering her face with her hands. "It's too much," she whispered. "I don't know how to accept it." Daniel sat beside her, his voice soft but firm. "You already have. And look at everything you've accomplished because of it. This isn't about owing me. It's about believing in yourself. Trust me when I say you deserve this." Though the conversation eased some of her guilt, Lila still wrestled with feelings of indebtedness. Over time, however, she came to see Daniel's actions not as a burden, but as a testament to the power of kindness. His generosity allowed her to focus on her dreams without constantly worrying about survival, a privilege she vowed to pay forward someday. As Lila continued to excel, her relationship with Daniel evolved beyond gratitude and mentorship. They spent more time together, discussing everything from medical ethics to childhood memories. Their shared values, compassion, resilience, and a desire to make a difference, created a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. One evening, after Ethan fell asleep following a lively game of cards, Lila and Daniel lingered in the living room, talking quietly. "Do you ever regret helping us?" Lila asked suddenly, her gaze fixed on the flickering candlelight. Daniel shook his head. "Never. Helping you reminded me of why I started my company in the first place. Not for wealth, but to solve problems and improve lives. You've given me perspective I lost along the way." Lila smiled faintly, meeting his eyes. "And you've given me a chance to build something meaningful. I'll never forget that." In that moment, something shifted between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the bond they'd formed. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it carried the weight of trust and admiration that transcended mere friendship. Meanwhile, Ethan flourished under the care of doctors and therapists. His laughter filled the apartment once again, and his energy proved infectious. He adored Daniel, often asking him to join family movie nights or teach him card tricks. For Daniel, spending time with Ethan felt like rediscovering joy he hadn't realized he'd been missing. Watching the boy thrive reinforced his belief in the importance of giving back, not just financially, but emotionally and personally. On Ethan's 12th birthday, they celebrated with a small gathering at the park. As Lila watched her brother race around with other children, her heart swelled with gratitude. Turning to Daniel, she murmured, "Thank you for giving us this. For giving him this." Daniel smiled, his expression softening. "He's an incredible kid. You've done an amazing job raising him." Tears welled in Lila's eyes, but she blinked them away, laughing softly. "We couldn't have done it without you." Years of sacrifice, late nights, and unwavering determination culminated in a single moment. Lila standing on stage, her cap adorned with the words, "Never give up," accepting her diploma as applause erupted around her. The auditorium buzzed with excitement, but for Lila, this was more than just an academic achievement. It was proof that no dream was too big if you were willing to fight for it. In the audience, Ethan cheered louder than anyone, waving a handmade sign that read, "We're so proud of you." His cheeks flushed with pride as he bounced in his seat, while Daniel sat beside him, beaming with quiet satisfaction. Watching Lila deliver her valedictorian speech, Daniel felt a swell of emotion. "When I started this journey," Lila began, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes, "I wasn't sure I'd make it, but along the way, I met people who reminded me that I wasn't alone. People who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. To my brother, Ethan, who inspires me every day to keep going, and to someone who became family, a stranger who changed everything. Thank you for showing me that kindness still exists in this world." Her gaze lingered on Daniel, who nodded subtly, his throat tight with emotion. For all his wealth and success, he'd never felt as fulfilled as he did in that moment. Helping Lila hadn't just transformed her life. It had reignited his own humanity. With her nursing degree in hand, Lila secured a position at the same hospital where Ethan had received treatment. Her colleagues quickly recognized her dedication and empathy, qualities that made her an exceptional caregiver. On her first day, she walked through the hospital corridors with a mix of nerves and excitement, knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Ethan, now healthy and thriving, embraced school with newfound enthusiasm. He excelled in his classes and joined extracurricular activities, proving to be as resilient as his sister. Their tiny apartment, once suffused with worry and uncertainty, now radiated warmth and laughter, a testament to how far they'd come. Meanwhile, Daniel found himself inspired by Lila's journey. He launched a foundation dedicated to providing scholarships, healthcare access, and mentorship programs for individuals facing adversity. Lila joined the foundation as a spokesperson, using her platform to advocate for others like herself, those who needed just one opportunity to change their lives. Together, they traveled to conferences, schools, and community centers, sharing their story and encouraging others to persevere despite challenges. Their partnership became a beacon of hope, reminding people that compassion and resilience could create ripples of positive change. If romance is included, the bond between Lila and Daniel deepens further over shared experiences and mutual admiration. One evening, after a particularly moving event where they spoke about overcoming obstacles, Daniel invited Lila for a walk along the riverbank. "I've been thinking," he began hesitantly, stopping beneath a lamppost. "You've taught me so much about what really matters in life. Sacrifice, love, kindness, things I'd forgotten until I met you." Lila tilted her head, studying him curiously. "What are you trying to say?" Daniel took a deep breath, his blue eyes reflecting sincerity. "I'm saying I don't want to imagine my life without you anymore. I care about you, Lila, not just as someone I helped, but as someone who's changed me in ways I never thought possible." For a moment, Lila was silent, processing his words. Then, a soft smile spread across her face. "You've done the same for me, Daniel. You showed me that even in the darkest times, there's light if you know where to look." Reaching out, she took his hand, intertwining their fingers. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of years of shared struggles and triumphs. In that moment, they both knew their connection had evolved into something profound, a love rooted in respect, trust, and gratitude. Months later, Lila stood outside her old apartment building, marveling at how different everything looked. The cracked windows had been repaired, the graffiti scrubbed away, and new tenants filled the units with laughter and life. Beside her, Daniel smiled, following her gaze. "You've come a long way," he said softly. "So have you," Lila replied, leaning into him. "We both have." As they walked away, hand in hand, Lila reflected on the journey that brought them here. From begging for leftovers to becoming a nurse, from struggling to survive to inspiring others. Every step had shaped her into the person she was today. And Daniel, once disconnected from the world around him, had rediscovered purpose and joy through her resilience. The rain began to fall lightly, mirroring the night they first met. But this time, it wasn't desperation weighing on Lila's shoulders. It was gratitude. Turning to Daniel, she whispered, "Sometimes, all it takes is one act of kindness to remind us we're not alone." He squeezed her hand, nodding. "And sometimes, that act changes everything. For both people."